who leans so heavily on Wittgenstein, should even have a concept of knowledge domain apart from a form of life. There is domain knowledge, but this knowledge has a history, a social history in which things could have been different. This form of life shapes my usage. For instance, the English language or arithmetic can be seen as domains of knowledge, but they also kind of compel me to speak in certain ways. But at the same time that language is made in society, Collins thinks that we have more control over it than Dreyfus suggests. According to him, Dreyfus failed to distinguish between individual knowledge and collective knowledge and focused only on individual understanding. Taking up the example of car driving again, Dreyfus talks about how we learn to drive in the sense of operating the car. But this leaves out the knowledge we need about traffic. This is Collins' take. Dreyfus has no concept of collective understanding that is separate from the concept of individual understanding. This is why he makes no clear distinction between expert car driving, that is gear changing, etc., which requires only the context of the machine and its relationship to the road to be internalized, and expert car driving in traffic, which requires national driving conventions to be understood and updated through immersion in the collectivity. Gear changing, like Dreyfus's iconic example of an expertise, that of the chess grandmaster, does not depend on collective tacit knowledge, whereas driving in traffic and most other expertises does. While I disagree with Collins that it is not so easy to distinguish between the two kinds of knowledge, or indeed that one should make this distinction between individual and collective knowledge. If the point is that driving is about collective knowledge, then this makes sense and helpfully brings in a social perspective. For thinking about technology, it means that technologies need to be understood not only in terms of micro skillful coping. That skillful coping needs to be related to a macro, wider social background knowledge. One could also draw on the work in contemporary STS from V.B. Baker and others that shows how the design of technologies is the outcome of a social process to support this point. More generally, on the one hand, we can learn from the social sciences that there is something like a collective social knowledge, that the background can at least partly be made explicit and is at least partly something which we can influence. Das Man is not simply given. Influenced by Heidegger, Dreyfus makes the background more mysterious and untouchable than it is. On the other hand, we can learn from Dreyfus that the social cannot be made entirely explicit in terms of rules and beliefs, and that there are limits to the extent to which we can control it. Another relevant objection to Dreyfus has been made by Selinger and Kreis. Here the target is Dreyfus's account of expertise. While the authors praise Dreyfus for bringing in a first-person perspective to studying expertise, rather than a third-person perspective, as the social sciences usually do, and for calling attention to the relation between expertise and the body, they complain that this account is not sufficiently sensitive to the cultural embeddedness of the expert, including prejudices, ideologies, and hidden agendas the expert may start from. Experts are not embodied and situated subjects, as Dreyfus shows us. They are also people that are culturally and socially embedded, and since that gives them prejudices, agendas, and so on, we should not naively trust them. Society might even be endangered by experts, an issue that cannot arise in Dreyfus's account. In particular, Dreyfus's point that experts might not be able to propositionally justify decisions seems dangerous. How can we trust them? And what is the assumed power on the basis of intuitions? The assumption made by the authors that trust necessarily relies on explicit knowledge, and the suggestion that Dreyfus's model of skill acquisition necessarily leaves out the role of the coach are problematic. Trust does not require that everything is made explicit. On the contrary, otherwise there is no need for trust. Trust is not necessarily the outcome of a rational process, but according to a social phenomenological view, is already embedded in the social and in relations. I also do not see why Dreyfus's model of learning excludes the possibility of coaching. For example, a coach can be helpful for beginners and even for experts, since a coach does not necessarily only give rules and instructions. She might also encourage a trial and error kind of process, of the kind that Dreyfus would have approved of. And Selinger and Kreis speak about a very specific kind of expert than the everyday expert of Dreyfus. Not the expert or driver or swimmer, but for instance, an expert who's asked about health and climate change, who is socially recognized as expert in the sense of a doctor or a scientist, and, for example, has a specific role to inform policy as an authority, who has an audience and so on. But the point about embeddedness is important, since it points again to a lacuna with regard to the social dimension of Dreyfus's model. Focused on embodied coping, the account of skill coping and expertise seems less sensitive to social, cultural, and political context than it could be. This includes the point suggested by the authors that experts are and should be vulnerable in the sense that they can be challenged with regard to their expertise and that they can be asked to give reasons. Even if not everything can be explained, and sometimes experts just have to say that they rely on their experience and intuitions. But it makes sense to say that the social and the political also includes giving reasons and deliberation. This is a lacuna in Dreyfus's work, and perhaps the more fundamental problem is that the entire social and political playing field in which experts are situated and which plays a role in what they say and become remains out of sight. How can this be conceptualized? Next to STS and Wittgenstein, pragmatism is another source which can help us to conceptualize the social dimension of skillful coping, which has a lot more to say on deliberation and public discussion that can be done within a Heideggerian framework. I'm going to put a point here, if I can. Dewey. I will make a summary here, and that is that it shows how important technology is to take up. And technology has made us unaware how to use words and concepts. They trick us, so to speak, and trick us to thinking we have skills we don't, and thereby taking away all skills that we could have had. The problem is the very second we leave the things that we interact with, and words are one of them. Words are actually skills. The very time we do that, we abandon skill, we abandon coping with, and we deteriorate, we tense, and we get confused because we start to think with concepts we don't know the meaning of. And thereby the problems we construct, or the analysis we do, the intellectualization we do, is not correct even for ourselves. This is incorrect thinking. We can only get the skills by interacting. Interacting with the world leaves us knowledgeable, we understand. And by doing that, we can base in the background, as both Dreyfus and the author of the article points to, we can devour meaning once more. And I would say, I don't think there is any argument at all that modern days have abandoned meaning and thinking altogether. It's absolutely clear. We are no longer thinking organisms. We are no longer Homo sapiens sapiens. We're not even able to reflect. And I think of this neurosis, one of the biggest signs are thinking becomes flat. We can no longer have parallel thinking, and we have this tense exclusion. I feel it now. I take away the background. Why is it so? My whole system thinks that the thoughts are inside the head. That will cause memory loss, lack of cognition, lack of thinking, anti-intellectual activities, randomness, inability to project into the future and to get our own memories. And it also has a spiritual dimension. We this way will lose permanence. We will be new for every moment. Because this flat line of thinking or existing, that is not an ideology, but caused by not understanding how words work or how the world works. The flatliner is a deadening of thinking. Can be seen on a functional magnetic resonance inference, can be shown on a MEG, can be shown on an EEG, EEC, electroencephalogram. EEG it is. And Wittgenstein sort of points in the direction of, in the working of things, if we start to train that and be skilled once more, handling the things around you with care, Sorge, you will develop a skill that leads you to think once more in a proper, grounded way. You will be, like in the poem of Hölderlin, you will be going back to your true home, and you will feel Heimlichkeit. You will feel at home. Now we are alienated, as the author of the article points out, Dreyfus as well. We are no longer in the world. We assume that we be transported here by a transcendental beam from another galaxy, and meaning cannot reside out here. Instead, we put everything in the wrong order. We start preemptively to give meanings to the things around us. Oddly, a mistake shared by Augustinus, who thought that we could learn language by ostensibly pointing at them, which is maybe one of the most ludicrous, but I'm afraid not unshared notions of language ever. How even would the child understand the pointing gesture? And how would it understand what the painting is without touching it, doing it? It is interesting to, I agree with the critique on Dreyfus here, but I think it has to do with the age of Dreyfus, that it is a bit preemptive to rule out internet and smartphones. But they do invite us to be transcendental. Too fast jumping into these areas will lead that we lose our embodiment, our understanding how words work, how meaning works, and how we ourself works. Because this also play into the Friedrich Matthias Alexander and his thinking that we start using our bodies in a technological way. I was at the university the other day and I saw people move about in the most weird, horrifying ways. Sunken in, mechanical. This is the bodily side of unthinkingly. And it hurted me, and I realized these people will develop severe diseases, autoimmune diseases, all those things that are springing up, all those things that are the other side of the coin of anti-intellectualism, or the flight from knowledge. Or this will also apply to the apeiron of Stephen M. Rosen. We are fleeing from borders, limits, because we have become accustomed, spoiled in a way, churlish, on making up our own subjective meanings to the world. And therefore, we become like emissaries, taking the role of the emperor and saying, I can design meanings to the world. And I think that's the first step to schizophrenia. Losing yourself in this Napoleonic view of yourself. The born of the ego, and that ego would refuse all learning. It has become too big. It has become an automatic process. Of course, as depicted in the reflective consciousness of the marvelous writer Richard E. Lind. That is the reflective consciousness, the unaware consciousness. And being in that situation will automatically either make you renounce awareness completely, like Daniel Dennett. I have no doubt at all that he doesn't experience awareness. Otherwise, he would never attack it. Wouldn't make any sense. He doesn't have it. It is as simple as that. But also those who cling to an idea, they feel the lack of permanence and they crave it. That won't do either. Unless you get into the world, you will not have permanence. You will be this transcendental, Max Tegmarkian entity without a body, projected onto an otherworldly sky somewhere in the nebula Antarctica or something, where you have no knowledge of anything. Why not all those mathematical realists who are so lost in themselves, so they assume that mathematical objects can come into existence by themselves. A worldview shared by most schizophrenics who have skill in mathematics. And today, sadly, 95% of all professional mathematicians share this view. It is just scary. It leaves you stunned. It is even worse than the Tegmark view. And I also see Carl Sagan wholly adopted the idea that Dreyfus, Wittgenstein and Heidegger is taking up. He's not in his body. He's as crooked as can be. He has no concept where his limbs are leading him. He looks unhealthy even. I did not notice that when I saw him when I was little, but I now have the knowledge to see that he's crooked in a way. And no meaning is in the world for him. It's all happenstancely projected from some subjective ego, some hyperbole of a true self, not a living self, and therefore very, very limited. Dreyfus, Wittgenstein, Heidegger and Mark Wrathall are presenting a hopeful view and also a path to gain true knowledge, not just empty concepts. And I would say, I was pointing to the universe, and all of us are suffering from this, everyday man as well. You don't have to go to a specific institution. Okay, there are levels. But I would say all of us are today in the modern world, except a few ones, living in this transcendental desert of no meaning. But there is hope. This is definitely pointing to a hope. And I hope I can be able to get back to it. Say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye-bye. Somebody tried to copy Anderson. I'd say not very successfully. And here we have art from the 60s.